the Consolidated Appropriations Act that the president signed into law on the 27th. So hang on to your hats, because here we go. It is very complicated. I'm going to try and get through as much as we can, and just basically I'm going to try and give you the information that's most helpful that you need to know right now. Let me pull up my slides. So give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides okay. Good. Okay, great. So there's new relief in this new law. One of the first things is there are new business types that are eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program. I think pretty much everybody on this call participated in Paycheck Protection Program, but there were a few organization types that were not permitted to participate the first time. They are now. Some businesses are eligible for a second round of PPP forgivable loans. So for those of you who went through the first time, you know, that was really, really good and helpful money, because it is it becomes a grant as long as you spend it appropriately. The next thing is there's more money available for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. I'm going to go into that a little bit more to see if it might be something that's helpful for you. And then live venues, theaters, museums, and zoos get grants. This is a special program that's separate from PPP, that's specific for any live performance venue. So the big thing you need to know, though, is that final guidance isn't due from the SBA until tomorrow. So if you go through and read this 5,693 pages, whatever it is, the actual law they passed, there are a lot of times in the law where it says the administrator will have to clarify, or the administrator is required to set procedures. So there's some things I just can't tell you yet. I can tell you what's in the law, but I cannot tell you what the SBA will promulgate for application procedures and all that kind of stuff. So that's coming out, we expect tomorrow, and we will follow up with additional guidance as soon as we get those rules. So there were also some improvements to previous relief. I can't imagine this affects many people, but if you've not filed for your forgiveness for your first PPP loan, there are new expenses that are eligible. I don't think we worked with anyone who was having trouble spending their PPP on eligible expenses. So that to me is just probably doesn't matter to anyone, but it's true. If you are having trouble spending your PPP on stuff that would be forgivable, there are new expenses that are eligible. They've also changed the covered period. You know, there's basically an 8-week period in which you had to spend your PPP on eligible expenses. So not only have they said there are new expenses that are eligible, they've also allowed you a great deal of flexibility in picking almost any number of periods since you got the grant, any contiguous 8-week period, and make that the period where you get forgiveness. So, I mean, both those things add up to, it should be very easy to get your previous PPP forgiven. We have, you know, our PPP at Newtown was less than 150,000, and we've already filled out the forgiveness application. But if you've not filled out the forgiveness application and your grant and your loan was under 150, you can expect in the next couple of weeks your lender is going to get you a 1-page form to fill out that doesn't have hardly any of the stuff that you were required to before. So if you've not filled out your application for forgiveness for PPP for the first round, hold tight, because you're definitely going to get an easier way to do that. The other thing that they changed, there was an opportunity to get an EIDL advance for up to $10,000. It was $1,000 per employee, up to $10,000 max, and that was just a grant. It was normally, for most people, it was the first pandemic aid that they received. But they said you can't get the EIDL grant and your PPP. You had to subtract it. Now that's not true. So you can get your complete PPP forgiven plus the $10,000 from the EIDL. And another thing that had become very concerning was whether the income was going to be taxable. I mean, that's sort of a, I don't know. I mean, how many people were posting profits that they were going to pay taxes on anyway during 2020? But this new law clarified that none of your pandemic relief is going to count as taxable income. So if you were profitable and you are going to have to pay taxes, you're at least not going to have to pay taxes on the EIDL and PPP that were forgiven. and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later. Not too many people chose to do the employee retention tax credit because you had to pick either PPP or ERTC, and most people pick PPP because they needed instant cash. But there are some improvements to the employee retention tax credit that I'll talk about too. So I want to dive in now on the people who are eligible for PPP for the first time. The first time the PPP program was restricted to nonprofits who were designated under 501c3 and for-profit corporations. Now all the other organizations under 501c3 are eligible. So chambers of commerce, visitors bureaus, as long as you have less than 300 employees and lobbying activities are less than 15% of revenue, less than 15% expenses, and less than $1 million, you're now eligible for a PPP. So, I mean, there probably aren't a whole lot of people that applies to, but C4s, C6s, there are some of them in our community. They missed out on PPP the first time. They're now eligible. Another note on that, again, we're waiting on the rules for this to come out. So you can expect this is going to be a week or two, but eventually you'll apply the same way everybody else applied, which is through a traditional lender. You'll apply through a bank or credit union to get that PPP. So that's just a few people. This is a lot more people. So some businesses are going to be eligible for another round of PPP. So even if you got the first round of PPP, you're going to be able to get it again. And this amount is going to be 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, up to $2 million, or 3.5 times your monthly payroll for hospitality businesses. This is a really big deal. It's going to add up to a huge amount of money for a lot of businesses in Macon. So the first condition to apply for this is that it has to be necessary. And again, this is an ambiguous term. It's something that you probably want to consult with your tax attorney or CPA, but you have to need the money to apply for it. The next condition is that you have to have fewer than 300 employees, although there are some exceptions. So if you're close on that, we can do a little more research. You just contact us and we'll let you know. You have to have been in business by February 15th of 2020, and you must have had a 25% reduction in revenue in any quarter comparing 2019 to 2020, excluding relief programs. I'm going to go through this a little bit more in a chart, but basically you've got to lay out your revenues by quarter for 2019 and then by quarter for 2020. And when you look at first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, you need one of those quarters where your 2020 revenue was 25% lower than your 2019 revenue. So total revenue doesn't matter. You could have had a profitable year in 2020 and had more revenue as long as one quarter was off by 25% from the previous year. The next program I wanted to mention is the grant program for venues. These are live venue operators who are open on February 29th of 2019 or 2020, sorry, February 29th of 2020. They also have to show a 25% reduction in revenue for any quarter, 2019 to 2020. So it's the same standard that I just mentioned for the PPP2. The grant, though, is equal to 45% of gross revenue from 2019 up to $10 million. The first round will go to venues with a 90% plus decline in revenue. And then they'll do a second round with a 70% plus decline in revenue. And they'll keep going until the funds are exhausted, or they can start back over and allow those 90% people to apply for a second round of 45% of gross revenue. It has to be used for normal operating expenses, and it cannot be used with PPP2, right? So for the venue operators, you are going to have to make a choice, between PPP2 or the grant for venues. And that's something that Newtown would be happy to walk you through. But in almost every case, the PPP2 is only 3.5 times of your payroll expense. And this is almost half of your total gross revenue. So in almost every case, the grant program for venues is going to be a better deal than PPP2. That's what we're expecting, but we'll be happy to walk you through that if you're concerned or have questions. So I mentioned the changes for EIDL. These are really small and minor. There are not too many people that this is going to impact. But there is more money added to the EIDL program. And if you have not applied yet, they've now extended the deadline to apply to the end of 2021. The EIDL program gives you a very low cost loan. It's a 30-year loan. It's fixed at 3 3/4% interest, I think, or maybe 3% interest. So it's very low cost. For instance, $150,000 EIDL loan costs $600 a month. So it is just the cheapest money out there. If you've not gotten an EIDL loan, you need to get one. There are definitely things you can invest in for your business or nonprofit with that money that are going to be worth it. So the second thing about EIDL, first thing, just to recap, is that you can now apply for that program through the end of 2021, and they've added a lot more money to it. So they're going to be able to fund loans if you're eligible. The second part is that businesses in low-income communities like Downtown Macon, who had an economic loss greater than 30% in any 8-week period, I know, this is just, I'm sorry. It is what it is. I can't help it. This is what Congress passed, right? So in the first case, I was telling you first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. For this program, it's any 8-week period, but it's got to be the same 8-week period in 2019 as 2020. And so, yeah, I see Trish, right? So you're thinking about Piedmont, you're going to need a weekly layout of revenues for both years in Excel, and then compare all those 8-week periods. Now, the next thing I'm going to tell you, it may not even be worth doing that because this is a really minor benefit. The benefit is if those things apply to you and you got less than 10K in your EIDL advance, you can now get the difference between 10K and whatever you got. So I'm trying to think of somebody this might apply to. Maybe Macon Arts. Like if you have 4 employees, you probably got an EIDL advance of $4,000. Well, this probably applies to you. You can go get another $6,000. And I would look at it the same way as I was applying for a $6,000 grant. Yeah, it's going to suck to lay out this revenue week by week, but hey, it's $6,000 for free. So that's the EIDL change. The next thing is the employee retention credit. This is available for businesses that experience an 80% plus decline in revenues in the first 2 quarters of 2021 than the same quarter in 2019. So I was telling you to compare 2019 to 2020. Now you got to do 2019 to 2021. So this is stuff that is happening right now. So you can't do this quite yet. But if your revenues are down that much, the employee retention credit will pay up to 70% of wages per employee, up to $10,000 per quarter, and for the first 2 quarters. The other thing about this program is you used to have to pick between the employee retention credit and the PPP, and now you can do both. I'm having a lot of trouble figuring out who this would apply to. I have not come up with an example in my mind yet of somebody who could benefit from the employee retention credit the way that it's been rewritten. But we'll see. I mean, maybe there's somebody out there. So here's just an example of how you would lay out your revenues by quarter. So, every quarter is 3 months. And so you're going to have first, second, third, fourth quarter. You're going to need to know what your gross revenues were in 2019 and 2020. So if you have that 25% decline or that 30% decline, you're going to be eligible for that PPP2 or the EIDL enhancement. And again, it doesn't really matter if you ended up profitable. Like if you had these other quarters where you were up and it ended up being a little bit better overall for the year. All we need is 1 quarter where you were down, and then you can apply for the second PPP. Another change that I do know affects some of you, if you have a loan from the Small Business Administration, SBA loan, a 7A, a 504, or a micro loan, or you're thinking about getting one, 504s are really good for owner-occupied real estate. So if you have owner-occupied real estate for your business, you really ought to think about maybe getting it refinanced into a 504. This is unbelievably awesome. SBA will pay the principal and interest on your SBA loan for 3 months, up to $9,000 a month, starting in February. That's going to happen automatically if you have one of these loans. Hospitality businesses get the same deal for 8 months. 8 months paid principal and interest. So think about this. If you're a business that owns your building, they're going to pay down your loan for 8 months. You're not going to have to make any loan payments. And not only that, they're going to pay the principal and interest as you go. You're going to end up with more equity in your building because of this. Here's the next thing that I was saying about some of you who might be thinking about taking on new debt or buying or starting a new project or whatever. New borrowers who close loans with the SBA before September 30th, they get the first 6 months of P&I paid. And then if they pay for the next 6 months, they get another 3 to 5 months free. The three months or 5 months is the difference between non-hospitality and hospitality businesses. Okay, so you're going to get either 3 or 5, depending on what kind of business you are. But that's a total of at least 9 months P&I paid. That is awesome. And so I know some of you have SBA loans or about to close them. The other thing they've changed is the way SBA loans have always worked is the federal government guarantees the banks against losses. So if a bank makes a loan under the SBA guidelines and the business goes bust, the SBA pays the bank for the loss, not the borrower. So it entices banks to make loans that they wouldn't typically make and to get money into small businesses. They've increased that guarantee to 90%. So only 10% of the bank's money is now at risk on these SBA loans. What that means for you is that banks are going to be a lot more flexible in approving SBA loans. So all that to say, it's going to be easier to get SBA loans. And if you get one, they're going to pay a significant amount of the interest and principal for you. And they're going to make your monthly payments for a serious amount of time. So that is a really, really good program that they've added. Pandemic unemployment has also been extended. This has been a wild ride. Early in the pandemic, we had $600 a week that was added to the state unemployment. But now they've extended your total unemployment eligibility by 11 weeks to a total of 50 weeks. So if you remain unemployed, you get to stay on unemployment longer. And they've added a new federal benefit of $300 a week on top of the state benefits. So it's not the $600, but it is $300. It also, gig workers are not eligible for state unemployment at all, but they are eligible for federal pandemic unemployment. So now there is at least $300 a week for gig workers. And for people who do both, people who have a full-time job and do some gig work, they can get $100 a week supplement on top of their state unemployment, whatever they're due based on that. But this is not expected to start paying out for weeks. It took, 6 or 8 weeks for them to get pandemic unemployment getting paid to workers the first time around. I don't imagine it will be much faster this time. So here's my summary. Again, I went through all these things. You've got to compare. So the point of this slide is you need your financial numbers for 2019 all the way up until today. And you need them by week and by quarter. So the number one thing you can do right now, we don't know when these applications are going to roll out. Again, I will tell you when they do. We will provide training to make sure you can fill them out. But right now, what you can do is whoever takes care of your financials, you can go ahead and ask them to get you these reports so that you can be prepared to see that if you're eligible for any of these programs. So if you have a 25% reduction in any quarter, you're eligible for PPP2. That same drop is going to make you eligible for the venue grant if you're a venue that does public performances. The employee retention tax credit requires an 80% drop, and then that EIDL differential requires a 30% drop in any 8 weeks. So you can go ahead and find your financials and start seeing if you would qualify for any of these programs. And that way you'll know I'm going to be eligible for PPP2. I got to keep an eye on that, but that's all I have to look out for. So that's what I would say right now is let's go ahead and get your financials together and triage and see what you're likely to be eligible for. If you're eligible for more than one of these programs, then you probably need to contact Newtown and let's sit down and talk about it and see which one's going to be most advantageous. So the next steps, if you're eligible, you should apply for assistance. We've run into a couple of people now who've run into trouble. They were doing great early in the pandemic, but now it's getting dicey. And they passed on some of their aid from the first time around because they were doing okay. Do not pass on anything you are eligible for. If you're eligible for it, take it. you don't know what's coming around the corner. I think this winter is going to be really slow. We've just had the benefit of the Christmas lights, and it's going to get hard now. The other thing I would say, if you're on the fence about whether you should take these things or not, is your competitors will. So if you don't want to be at a disadvantage over the other businesses around you, you need to take advantage of these programs if you're eligible. There are tons of examples in downtown of businesses that were doing okay, but got assistance and were able to invest in something to expand their business instead of just making up ground from previous losses. So this assistance, if you can get it, you should get it, and you should use it. You should use it to keep your business going or to expand it in ways that'll make you more durable and profitable in the future. We'll update you as regulations are finalized, so you can keep an eye on our website. We will definitely be doing additional in-depth classes about each of these things to make sure we can help you apply and that you get everything you're eligible for. And then as you navigate the process, we'd love to hear from you. So as you talk to your financial professionals, as you start to go through the process, even if you can do this independently, you don't need our help, please let me or Emily know how it's going. In the previous round of aid, it was so helpful because so many of you were working with so many different lenders. You were able to tell us the quirks and obstacles and experiences that you had, and we were able to share those really widely to help your fellow business people. So the more you can let us know, the more that that we'll be able to help everybody else. And you can do this. It is going to suck. It's not going to be fun, but we're going to be in it with you, and we're going to help you get it done. And I just don't want you to pass up because it's overwhelming. Yes, it's entirely overwhelming, but we got to do it to get the money into our businesses to make sure we can survive and thrive. So we're here to help you, and I believe in you, and we will get through this together again. And hopefully we'll be able to get everybody some significant benefits that can help sustain and grow your businesses. So that's it. I know that's a lot, but does anybody have any questions?
Josh, I sent you a direct message. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, right.
While you're reading that, Josh, too, you know, I encourage everybody to look at the chat. Scott Mitchell's put in there about using the cherry blossom weeks, you know, to get the EIDL advances and so forth. So y'all watch the chat. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, that's a really smart idea, Scott. That's all we're looking for here is we are looking to check a box, right? So it doesn't matter why, it matters that it exists. And that's why I would suggest going straight to the numbers. Because it's entirely possible that that there's some 8-week period that just it happened to happen. And yes, Scott, you're right. So if you applied for the EIDL advance and you got $1,000 or $2,000, you'll now be able to apply for the difference up to 10 grand as a grant, as long as you had that 30% reduction in any 8-week period. Yeah. Now, how to do that, I can't tell you yet. Now, let's see. Chelsea sent me one. Business that did not open until 2020. Yeah, I mean, it sucks, but you're left out. So in every one of these programs, the condition for benefit was to be open by the absolute latest, fully functional on February 29th of 2020. So none of these programs apply to businesses that opened, you know, right before the pandemic started, or even during the pandemic. It sucks. You know, I'm sorry. I just think it's one of the differences between like being in Congress and being on the ground is you realize, well, wait a minute, that business is experiencing exactly the same impacts and is in a much tougher position, but none of these benefits apply to a business that was open during the pandemic. Any other questions or comments or concerns?
Hey, Josh.
Yes. Yes. Hey, Dr. Holliday.
Thank you. Are you going to post your slides somewhere I can
Sure.
review?
Yeah, we've already got them publicly shared, so I'll set up. If y'all keep talking before the end of the meeting, I'll pop it into a bit link and put it in the text, and then Emily can get it on our website too.
I know.
And we'll send this stuff through email as well. We're recording this portion of the meeting, so I'll send that in a follow-up email.
I want to ask for your indulgence and cut me a little slack. I did not read all 6,000 pages. I read as much as I could, and then I've also aggregated as much research across reputable news sites as I could. It's possible I've gotten something wrong here too. So, when this guidance comes out tomorrow, we'll be a lot stronger. But the bottom line is, you can go ahead and run your financials now. You're going to need that no matter what, to figure out whether you qualify for these baseline qualifications. Anything else? Great. We'll keep y'all up to date and make sure you have the information you need as soon as we get it.